Welcome viewers to the 20th episode of Beyond Phrenology. And we are glad to have with us Professor Benoît Bardy from France today. Professor Bardy is the director of the EuroMove Center, which is at University of Montpellier. It's one of the powerhouses to study human movement, very similar to, in fact, more advanced in some ways from what we have in the US here at University of Nebraska at Omaha, kind of siblings, I would say.
Very close.
Right? And Professor Bardy has an amazing career trajectory and is a living example of the diverse backgrounds from which scientists come. So he's a gymnast and a dancer and sportsman by training. Grew up in Africa all his youth, in different cultures in different countries, moving around a lot. Thereafter went to metropolitan France for his undergraduate education diploma in neuroscience, which automatically was followed by a PhD in movement science.
Correct.
Right? And he worked a lot about running, driving, and walking, and basically the role of optic flow and the role of tau variables, so a very ecological psychology concept. So he has been trained in the ecological tradition. And as you can imagine, being trained in the ecological tradition, he did his postdoc with Professor William Farron at Brown University, US. So deep roots to movement, deep roots to ecological psychology, and deep roots to the idea of improving movement and studying movement from the ecological perspective. So welcome, Professor Bardy, to the show.
Thank you, Madhu. Thank you for having me. It's great to be with you.
And by the way, viewers, Professor Bardy is also the creator of the organization, basically the EuroMove program. So, Professor Bardy, did I miss something which you would like to elaborate on your career trajectory? And then we're definitely keen to hear a lot about the EuroMove Center.
No, that's great. I like the mention of the we're sibling together, between Omaha and Montpellier, as indeed I think those two institutes were sort of created around the same time and followed the same trajectory. I'm regularly in touch with you, and it's great to see. It's kind of, I mean, there are some differences, but it's very close. When we when Wick visited and we discussed the comparison between the two, it's a very interesting situation and sistership.
Yeah, exactly. So, Professor Bardy, what what is the historical backdrop about the EuroMove Institute? So, I know you were a professor. So that's the time you moved to University of Montpellier to establish this institute. What was the motivation? What it took for you? What kind of efforts it took, and what is actually the mandate of this institute? Why do you want to study movement with in that elaborate capacity, the way you do there?
Yeah, I think it's related to the way research is organized in Europe, which is a bit different, from the kind of research institution you have in the US, for instance, or Canada or other places. We have those like big collaborative projects, between countries, between disciplines, I'm sure we're going to go back to that a few times during that conversation. And so I was at the time in Paris, and I was in a series of projects. One was called Enactive. That's an interesting also topic for our discussion. It was a big EU network of excellence trying to sort of compare, EP, ecological psychology, and, Francesco Svarela enactivism and inaction, with many very interesting people. Kevin Oregan was part of that program too. And so we did like 3 or 4 years of networking, conferences, workshops, and the European Union, through its commission, the European Commission, was interested to create a sort of real physical entity somewhere in Europe. And so, long story short, we travel across different places in Europe, and Montpellier in the south of France was interested to host the center and pay for it, which, you know, is not nothing.
Right.
And so I managed to move to Montpellier, and then, you know, it took a few years. But so, you know, starting with those projects, decided to create a physical institute somewhere around movement, you know, was born, and this is why I moved to Montpellier. And so the idea of the center was to have a, of course, the thing changed, you know, over the years. You know, people came and then left, and then new people arrived. But basically, the idea is to, so we have one goal in EuroMove still today, which is to, you know, understand why we move the way we move. We have those movement signatures, both like individual signatures that differentiate us from others, but also like signatures of groups, you know, when we belong to a particular group compared to another group, like Parkinson patients or experts, like athletes, or so this idea of like this sense of signatures that we can identify in the way we move with different disciplines, neuroscience, EP, coordination dynamics, mathematics, data science in general. We have quite a bit data scientists now and AI people in the group. Basically, to understand, you know, those signatures, discover the right metrics to characterize them, and that's our main goal. Yeah, and so the center today is organized around like three main pillars: so movement science, health sciences, and data sciences. We are calling it now EuroMove Digital Health in Motion. You know, to take the digital revolution that accompany AI. And basically, so we have the science part, which is this research team, but also we have a big tech platform with all the equipment, training facilities, and something that is not very common, at least in France, is that it's also an incubation site and a research and development place. So, you know, we're trying to foster relationship between basic science, clinical science, but also entrepreneurship and create startups.
Which is very unique to that institute compared to most labs or most organizations, academic organizations we know of.
It's pretty rare in France to have like, so basically this is the flowers with the 5, you know, petals, like science, tech, incubation, R&D, and training, that are sort of mixed together. And we have created the building in such a way, like the architecture, the rules, the 24/7 access, you know, to everything all the time, in such a way that would favor, you know, the interactions between the different sectors. Of course, it's not easy. You know, we're not like the entrepreneurs and the scientists. They're not living in the same bubble. They're not living in the same time space.
Right.
But we're trying to, you know, foster these synergies. And indeed, I don't know of any equivalents. There is the Move Institute in Amsterdam, in Netherlands, which sort of resemble, you know, this aspect. But that, at the time, at least, they didn't have like the entrepreneur aspect. And in the US, at least in like perception, motor control, movement science, this is not very common either. But you have something like that. What do you have in Omaha? Is close to that, no?
Is the closest, but still it's a little different. Given that it's still you know, a university department, we do have a startup running from the building. But we are not organized the same way you organized. We are organized more as cores: movement analysis core, nonlinear analysis core, and machining and prototyping core. So which follows a structure dominated by the NIH, as well as a little more constraints, the state level constraints and regional constraints. So it's doing very well, but it's a little different structure. And I guess we also have a little smaller space than you do. It seems to be the case. So, I mean, for the viewers, when it comes to instrumentation, I was amazed that one of the instruments you have where a person stands on a hydraulic arm in a chamber, and you can almost create any kind of simulation. Would you like to tell a little bit about more of that device, as well as it's one of its kind, right? It was made specially for this kind of work and for your institute.
Yeah, I don't know if we did the equipment inside the building or the building around the equipment.
Yes.
But it was a masterpiece when we decided to build the center. Actually, this reminds me a nice anecdote that a nice conversation that I had with Heinrich Bülthoff in Tübingen at the Max Planck in Germany. We were in the same EU project at the time, and he was building in Tübingen at the Max Planck, kind of the same. He already had built this kind of big, simulator and big platform, and so we were sort of friendly, competing, in the kind of equipment we would put. So I went to Tübingen, discussed with Henri, came back to Montpellier, and so we created this big simulator. So we call it iMuse, which is an interactive simulator at EuroMove. It's basically a big motion platform, and we do have like two ways to use it. One is just a cockpit, so it's a regular, flight simulator if you want. So you can fly around, and we're doing a lot of research on orientation, spatial orientation, the way pilots, are disoriented, motion sickness, and all kinds of situations that you can imagine with that system. Mostly flying, and we have projects with like the big tech and companies. Airbus is one of them. We've done 10 years of project with Airbus using the equipment. But also more recently, we have created what I call the flying carpet, which is a more, so have you seen that? So it's basically—
Yeah, I'm talking about the flying carpet, yes.
So it's basically a treadmill that can sort of, fly around like in the 6 degrees of
with a hydraulic arm, right? So
that's right. So you have this big robotic arm, and at the top of that, you have this flying carpet. And so you can do standing, you can do walking, you can do running. And so that's a way to, I think this is going to echo some other element we're going to discuss later, maybe, is that I'm always looking for sort of naturalistic situations. So if you want to move people around, I mean, you need to move people around, right? So you need like, you need space, you need a big volume. And so the system is there to be able to, you can control what's happening on this flying carpet from the control room, but it's also closed loop with the way people move on the flying carpet.
Right.
And so we do motion sickness, we do walking, running. My friends from robotics around, they're putting their little robots, on the platform and make them fall. I mean, all kinds of public science that we do, but also the platform is accessible to those from the R&D sector willing to, test their technology.
Right. And this is especially unique about the structure of the EuroMove, right? Where you have researchers and inventors and entrepreneurs working together with the same facility and access to the same kind of tools, which generally are very restricted to academicians.
Yeah, this was a key point at the beginning, and also like the deal we had with the payers, the region, the county, the EU, the European Commission, and others who paid for the building and the equipment, is that we would really try to push that interaction between the private sector and the public domain. So scientists can use the equipment, all the equipment that we have, but entrepreneurs, can use the equipment, and also people from outside. So Airbus, for instance, have been using the equipment in project, and we have a business model that is beneficial for the scientists, for the public domain. So basically, the rich private people, they pay for the poor, public scientists in a way. So that's a business model that allows everyone to use the equipment at the same time, maintain, that platform and other platform that we have a big mocap platform, so we can replace the equipment and just do the science that we want to do.
And it's very important for a young. I'm talking from the career perspective of a young researcher. That when you start your lab, and we always are in a mode that okay, I'm making this lab, and that takes like years to develop the lab to get the funding, right? And
Yeah.
even when you are able to get those funding, and you are sitting in your chamber with your instrument, like I own this mocap or I own this, stuff. It's hard to upgrade that and keep it up to date, for instance, right? It's a lot of technical work for a lab to manage things.
Yeah.
And with
Yeah.
centers like these, a young person can just come in and start with state of the art research, and the facility is always updated as it's state of the art.
Exactly, Madhu. So you have the pros and the cons, right? Is that
Yeah,
the cons are it's not your place, it's not your lab. You don't have access 24/7 to the thing that you want, the equipment that you want to use for the thing that you want to do. So it's a little more of a logistical organization, to et cetera, et cetera. So this is like collaborative. Actually, that's a key word in Europe. We are more collaborative in terms of the funding, in terms of the buying of the equipment, et cetera. But you have a system that is not far in Omaha. But the pros is indeed that it's easier to maintain the equipment. And as you just say, a young scientist who's just arriving on a new position, has access to everything and can use that equipment for whatever they want to
right,
do. And also we have so those platforms they are open and accessible to anyone willing to use them. Of course, again, we need to control. So we have dedicated engineers taking over the platform. You need to pay a little bit to access the system when you're not from EuroMove. Even when you are in EuroMove, we're using the grants to maintain those equipments. It's just a different way, and indeed, it's easy. Actually, you're mentioning a very good point for the young ones. Starting a career, it's nice to be here because suddenly you have access to everything.
right. As well as it's very resource efficient, because I know labs who own stuff. It's not that we are using all the time. It's especially in fields like this, in movement science, we study movement for an hour that generates so much of data within an hour. It takes months to analyze. So from that
Yeah.
perspective as well.
Yeah. So that's EuroMove. It's basically so those 5 components
Yeah,
are working or trying to work together. And recently there was like during COVID. So by the way, I'm not the director anymore. I was a director for since I arrived in Montpellier. I mean, I studied the launching phase, and then there was a director of the place for 2 terms, which is like 10 years. And then during the pandemic, I passed the baton to a new director, Stéphane Perret, who was my deputy. He's a wonderful director. And I closed the center during COVID, and he reopened the center, right after COVID. So it was a nice transition here. And so today this is also something that is classic in France in terms of how the science is organized. We are multi-institution. So EuroMove is both, it belongs to the University of Montpellier. That's the main, umbrella of
right,
the center. But it's also we have a big national engineer school, which is called the Mines Telecom National Engineer School. They have like different locations in France. There is one very close to Montpellier in Alès. And so this is the second umbrella of the center. So we have now a mix of we have a group of people like neuroscience, EP, cognitive science, and all kinds of discipline, clinical science, neurology, geriatrics, physical medicine and rehabilitation, but also a lot of mathematicians and data scientists, which is for the kind of thing that you and I do,
right,
is extremely interesting because they have the skills that we need for our question, but we have the data that they need for their questions. So it's a nice circular and
right,
mutual interest to work together.
right. In fact, I mean, even if you look from the science perspective, a lot of us neuroscientists or movement scientists are we can call us data scientists for the most part.
Yeah.
Right. So, so Professor Bardy, like when you started this institute, the EuroMove, You started with a mandate, with some aspirations and some kind of expectations that this is how it will turn out, in a decade of time, or like 2 decades. And it's been about 2 decades now, or very soon it will be 2 decades since the project started. So what has been the impact in general on science, and in general about you think about things over your career?
It's hard, I mean, it's hard to tell. It's both very, it's already, like, as you say, almost 20 years, 15. And at the same time, still very new. The science takes time, and the way those
Right.
ideas diffuse, in the community takes time. I think we have achieved, so if, quantitatively and qualitatively, we can go into a few examples here. But basically, like officially 10 years, it was a little more. We had the 10th anniversary of the center last June. It was a nice little feast, that we did for that occasion. And so it was a good time for us to sort of wrap up and summarize what we've achieved a few like in June, just before the summer. I mean, it's like a typical research institute. So, 700 publications in those different domains, 15, 20 million euros of grants. We mentioned IMUS. That was an achievement to create that big platform, to that big simulator. The outcome in terms of the science is still in progress for that big platform. We have published a few things. We have done a R&D project and
Yeah.
science, but we are still, believe it or not, in the ramp up phase.
Right.
With the platform and COVID hit, etc. And I'm particularly proud of the startup that we have created, because again, there was not a given to be able to have those people work together. So basically, the way we do that is we attribute a EuroMove stamp on the startup that are knocking at the door.
Yeah.
So let's say you have a young entrepreneur, he's knocking at the door, he wants to enter the center because the equipment is there, the science is there. So we have so 5 criteria, to be able to enter the center. So one is that it has to be related to the way we move, and we're talking like human movement. We're not talking animal movement, just because there are other places in the country. So it's really human movement. So that's number one. Number two, it has to be innovative. So either a tech, let's say an app, an algorithm, a service, a rehab method. It has to be like innovative in some way. Number three, for those young startups, is that they have to work with us in a way. So they have to work with public scientists, because most of the money comes from like public institutions. And so it is not necessary with us scientists within EuroMove. It can be with other people, outside the center. But the public science has to be there. It has to be science-driven, the type of innovation that they're producing.
Right.
Then they have to be a member of an incubator, like an official incubator somewhere, because we are not an incubator. We are an incubation site for those incubators.
Right.
And we don't do like the patenting, the management, the business model. We're only doing like the science and the tech. And so they have to be a member of a big incubator somewhere. And I forgot the last one, but there's another one. And so basically, when those criteria are met, we accept them. They pay a very small fee, like 200 euros per month.
Yeah, I was actually surprised looking at the fee. I mean, you can't get even an apartment room for that price, for which you're giving them nice offices and workspace.
We give them a nice office and, fully equipped, and they have access to the, science equipment. So the reason it's cheap is because, I mean, they have no money, right? So they stay with us for like 3 years maximum. It can be renewed maybe one, but that's, pretty rare. And then if they want to stay, then they move to the R&D part of the center, which is at market price, right? So it's basically more expensive. But so we sort of protect those young
Right.
entrepreneurs. Some of them come from the science part of the building. They were PhD. We have examples of those PhD that have like sort of migrated to the other aisle of the center to create, their own little startup. And some of them are now, big SMEs, and others died. I mean, not them, but their startup. I mean, it's the dynamics of creating a startup.
Yeah,
So it's very cheap at the beginning, and it goes up to a market price as time goes on. And so we have created 11 of them. I've not been, part of those, company. None of them. I was like managing the place. So I wasn't involved in those startups, but we were there with my team to accompany them and make sure they were successful, doing mostly the science part. So we were sort of the scientists behind the scene,
right.
helping to validate, let's say, a protocol, helping to test an app, helping to compare different rehab programs. So we try to find ways that this entrepreneur aspect was very tight, with the science that we do. And when I wanted to create one of those companies myself, but I was dying to do that, but I couldn't. And so when my term was over, I decided to jump in that
Yeah.
entrepreneurship area, and I did one.
So yeah, let's talk about that. So you do have a company called BeatHealth, and an app
Ooh.
called BeatMove, and I looked at the website. Very interesting stuff. So would you like to tell a little more about what's a startup, and what kind of products it's working on, and its mission and objectives when we're talking about health and wellness?
So yeah, everything is health and wellness, because I think this is the last criterion that I forgot to mention earlier, is that I mean, we're all concerned by health and wellness. This is absolutely key. Everything, everywhere, with everyone. And so the movement signatures of health, the movement signatures of health, the tech to maintain a good health and prevent cardiovascular disease, obesity, cancer, etc., etc. And so BeatHealth was an example of that. It was health and wellness on the beat. That was kind of the idea. It was an EU project at the beginning. So we started with the science. It was a consortium of like maybe 20 people, 25 people, between like 5-6 different countries in Europe. And that was a long time ago. It was like, this project was 10 years ago. We started in 2013. And the idea was to basically create a small technology that would maintain like synchronization between moving and the music BPM, constantly. So for instance, you're doing physical activity, right? You're running, you're swimming, you're cycling, you're walking. What do you do?
I do running. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm sure, I mean, not all of us, but most of us, we like to run in music, right?
Yeah, I do podcasts, but yes,
Oh,
but
you do
people,
podcast.
yeah, but people like music more, right? Because of the
People like
beats.
to
Yeah.
run in music, or to
Yeah.
walk in music, or to cycle in music. And you have certainly noticed that, well, first of all, you select the BPM you like to run with.
Right.
And they're usually plus 10, plus 20% of your like natural cadence.
Right.
We do that because it's very ergogenic, it's pushing us. And you
Yeah.
have certainly noticed how good we feel when we are in sync with our music. And so,
And that's why we choose different music while we are running versus while we are walking, right?
exactly,
Yeah.
absolutely, exactly. And so what you do is like you change your step length, or frequency, in order to be in sync with your music. And when you are in sync with your music for a prolonged period of time, this is heaven, right? You can run forever.
Yeah.
It's really wonderful. And then it stops being wonderful when suddenly there's a red light, there's a hill, you're changing your running pattern just for whatever reason, you have to speed up or slow down, and then you're losing your music. And when you're losing your music, things, can get bad, because instead of stabilizing the way you run, because this is one of the property of the music BPM, cueing,
Right.
stabilizes the way you walk or run. Cueing stabilizes biology in general. It can be breathing, it can be, the heart rate, it can be walking and running, but music has this amazing, propension to stabilize, biology. But then when you're losing your music BPM, things get, unstable, and you can fall depending on how you walk or run, and things get very unstable. And so the app that we have developed, which is called BeatMove, basically maintain that synchronization all the time. So instead of changing the way you run to be in sync with your music, BeatMove change the BPM of the music, so
Oh,
it stays in sync with
so
your rhythm.
it has a kind of a two-way communication. So it actually monitors your movements or your the frequency of your movements as well, to kind of give a feedback in some ways.
So it does exactly. So what it does is that, first of all, the app, so it's basically a phone.
Yeah.
It's not your phone yet. This is like BitMove number 2. We're still BitMove number 1. So this is like a phone that we give, to runners and patients. We can discuss like the who are we, giving that technology to. So there's a phone headset and 2 sensors that we put on the ankles, because we need a precise
Right.
contact, of the foot, on the ground. So your phone, actually, those last generations, the iMuse inside those phones, they are precise enough to be able to give, the contact, even if you wear them in your pocket, but you have to have a tight pocket. I mean, it's not easy. So
Right. Right.
we have our sensors, on your ankles, and so basically the app detects your walking or your running cadence, and then goes into this library. So we have 700 music classified by genres of music, so pop, rock, classic, etc., etc. And then suddenly, after like 30 or 45 seconds, boom, so the first music that comes in is exactly in sync with your cadence. And then if you speed up, the music speeds up. If you slow down, the music slows down. So music is compressed, so we compress or delay the music a little bit within a certain range. So the music is always in sync with your movement. But of course, if you slow down too much, or if you speed up too much, then the app switches to another music, which is more in line in terms of the BPM, of your biology. So that's the first thing that the app does. It maintains that synchronization. And then both for sport and for mostly Parkinson patients, the other thing that the app does is that it entrains you toward a higher cadence. So basically, it starts with your natural cadence,
Yeah.
and then subliminally takes you to +5, +10, or plus 20% through the music. So music is a way to sort of entrain you toward a higher cadence, which for Parkinson patients is important because they
Yeah.
tend to go too slowly.
Or for any kind of rehabilitation after some injury, or in older adults, for instance, this can be used.
Yeah, so we have started. So during the EU project, we had a program for runners, like casual runners,
Yeah.
not like expert runners. As you know, expert runners, they don't like running in music
Yeah.
for most of them, and it's exactly, I think, for this reason. It's
For this
because
reason.
music destabilizes them, when they are not perfectly in sync. That's number one. And number two, music is forbidden during like long distance running. You cannot run
Oh,
with you cannot run with your
so
with your
so so in marathons, music is not allowed.
music is considered by the International Federation long distance as a being a technological it's a technological doping.
Okay.
You cannot
Yeah.
run with your music, and it is not clear why, because I mean music has many properties, right? It's a distractor of pain. It's
Yes.
ergogenic, it sort of pushes you, increase motivation, release all kinds of, happiness, hormones in your brain, etc., etc. But at the same time, for us, it's a technological doping device, because when you are in sync, And if you put those BPM a little higher than your natural cadence, it can help you to speed up. And so
Right.
this is what runners are not really like top runners, but like, of course, occasional runners like to run music. And so we had one program for running, and we had one for people suffering from Parkinson's disease. And this is like the number one target at the moment. We really studied the company, the startup with like Loïc Dam, who is an amazing scientist and engineer at EuroMove, Valérie Cochin-de-Coq, she's our neurologist at the local clinic called Clinique Beausoleil. We've done like clinical trial phase 1. We are in the midst of a big clinical trial at the moment, to make sure the technology works the way we want. And so we noticed like they fall less, they freeze less, they increase their velocity, their step length, and their cadence when they use the system. And so based on those results, at the EU project, we decided to create the startup. And now we're deploying the app mostly in France and Europe, but also a little bit, we have a few devices, around the world.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good idea, right? Like if you have issues with movements or propensity to fall, listening to Spotify or listening to any random playlist, it's a better idea to have an app which actually monitors and kind of reduces fall as well as improves your cadence and ability to run and walk more.
It's a music pacemaker.
It is a, yeah, you can, it is a pacemaker. Yeah, it is a pacemaker.
It's a pacemaker. In contrast with the traditional cueing method, which is metronomic.
Right.
So rigid in many ways. So it's metronomic and rigid. Music has all kinds of, positive.
It's more ecological as well. It's more ecological stimulus than traditional metronomic cueing.
Absolutely. And something, this is like food for thought, actually, especially your area of expertise. Is this interesting? Well, actually, so Dobromir Dotov, was with us in EuroMove. I should have mentioned Dobry much before. Dobry was with us, in EuroMove on that BeatHealth project, and we did with Dobry, those experiments. There's some of them are still in progress, like trying to compare, like a rigid metronomic cueing stimulation with a more 1/f, more fractal, more like natural variability within the music, because one difference between the music and the metronome is that the music is made by humans.
Yeah.
And so because it made, in most cases, with some exception, but because it's a sort of a human-based cueing method, it is naturally variable.
Yeah.
And so those variability property that we have in music, we think are more efficient to, find the best compromise between stability and adaptability in the way people walk around.
Yeah, they are not even just pink. They're like multifractal, much more nuanced than simple fractal or simple pink noise.
Yeah. So that's a pacemaker.
Right.
We are not. Of course, the goal is not, to replace like deep brain stimulation, for Parkinson patients by our phones and apps, but it's sort of overlap a little bit, with like on a scale from 1 to 10, for PD, like around like 2, 3, 4, when people are still able to walk without any without any external aid. It really gives some good results. And so we had some young entrepreneurs in EuroMove already, Guillaume Talon, Antoine Seyes, and others. And so when we discussed that, Simone Dallabella, my friend and colleague Simone Dallabella, is now in Montreal. He's running a big a neuroscience music institute in Montreal. He was in Montpellier with us at the time. And so this sort of ecosystem, with the scientists, the engineers, and the entrepreneurs, we decided to create this small company. This is recent. We started the company 2 years ago, and we're still in the very early phase of the company.
So, the great neurologist Oliver Sacks has a book called Musicophilia, talking about different neurological cases and the implications of music for both for the treatment, from the treatment perspective, what music kind of reveals about the brain. A very interesting read along the same lines.
It's wonderful, Madhu, because I mean, of course, this is a little bit different, but it echoes the benefit of music, the rhythmic benefit of music,
right?
For moving in general. So, for two reasons, as you know, so we treat basically the locomotor system as a rhythmic system, with a particular, a preferred frequency, etc. So that's one rhythmic system, and we treat music as another rhythmic system, and we couple oscillator everything together. And so you put a coupling function, between the music and the locomotion, and that's the brain.
Yeah.
And when the coupling function, when you increase a little bit the coupling between the two with the BPM, then things get in sync, right? So that's number one. And number two, I learn because I'm not a neuroscientist, originally, but I'm paying more and more attention to those brain structures that are involved, both in the sensory aspect and the motor aspect. And as you know, there's a lot of overlap between those structures.
Yeah.
And so music is a way to sort of either bypass the basal ganglia that are touched by the pathology, by PD, or reactivate those pathways that has been impaired by the pathology in an amazing way. So both the bypassing and the reactivating of those structures, take the BPM of the music into your motor commands, and you stabilize walking and running. And so there is an incredible series of recent articles, on this neural pathways and the locomotor dynamics.
Yeah.
And music is a nice link between those two.
Right. No, it's actually very interesting. And even if you think from a very anthropological perspective, I mean, not from the individual perspective, at least from a collective perspective, a lot of our traditions, rituals, they all revolve around music and beats and drums and social coordination, like parades, for instance. We are always coordinating movements and coordinating, and we know now that when you do that, the heart rates and the breathing rates of people are also coordinated, and then they feel empathy and they feel the connectedness with each other. So it's doing much more than movement. The beats are doing much more than movement.
Absolutely. It's I remember the do you know this conference, like the International Neuromusic Conference?
I don't know this one. No.
It's a conference at like I remember at the beginning of the BeatHealth project, we went to that conference. It was in France. It was in Dijon. Maybe we were 150 people. Now the Neuromusic Conference is, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people are coming to this conference. It's an incredibly lively field of science with the tech around, and indeed, like, it's not only movement, it's like the entire biology and culture, is involved as well. And people are looking at now the way intra-utero, when you're pregnant and you're walking down the street, the way those rhythmic pattern affect in specific way body and brain of the fetus, and in such a way that even like 5 to 10 years later, the kind of BPM that you like is the one that you've been experiencing very early. It's fascinating. It's like all kinds of branches are coming out of this science, and it's wonderful.
And that explains why different cultures tend to kind of deviate towards certain kind of music, and it remains, right? Yeah. No, it's very interesting. So when I go to gym, I do a lot of treadmill running, and I started a podcast. But after an hour, when I'm tired and when I'm low in energy, I mostly switch to some rock music. And that kind of explains that, like, podcasts don't have any cadence or don't have any benefit of that kind. And when I'm actually not able to move as much, I'm actually utilizing and gaining energy from that rhythmic beating of the of the music.
I would be interested to put my sensors on your ankles while you are running and listening to your podcast, just to see like
Versus,
the coupling between the non-rhythmic, sound. Or
yeah,
language is rhythmic a little bit, but of course it has nothing to do like the frequency spectrum, of
right.
speaking completely different. I'd be interested to look at the coupling between the two.
Right. And from the basic difference in structure between music and non-music, is it just about rhythmicity and recurrence, or is it something else about these two? So when does a music becomes a non-music? Like, do we understand that?
I don't know. The thing that we've been doing is really, contrasting. This is rhythmic music, this is no music. So we have never really tested a
Kind of a gradient.
progression.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that would be yes, that's an interesting suggestion.
Yeah.
Well, food for thought.
Right. There's a lot to explore there. So now the ShareSpace EU project. So
ShareSpace.
yeah, so you have this, or maybe let's talk about individual motor signatures first, right? So you mentioned this to begin with. When we started the conference, you said there are individual motor signatures of us, and they are signatures more embedded within groups, or they differ across groups. So, for instance, people with ALS, people with Parkinson's, or different age groups have different kind of motor signatures. And we do now know that we are, for instance, now there's a more and more work going on to identify and diagnose and prognose disease based on movement signatures, whether it's speech or pupil dilation or body movements. Heart rate is also a movement in some ways. So what are the foundations of these signatures, and what's the neuroscience behind that? So what can you elaborate on that? Like, what's the role of movement signatures in your work and projects, and some of your key findings?
Yeah, I've been spending quite a bit of time this last 15 years on on this idea, and the origin of that, I would say, is this just reading that I had on evolution from. So if you start with so where do those signatures come from? What is this idea that we have a very personalized? Because now everyone everywhere, as you say, is very personalized. Right. Even the brand, there are wonderful articles coming out every week on brand signatures, very personalized brand signatures, etc. Well, I think it all started maybe 4 million years ago. So when Ardipithecus ramidus, left the tree. So Ardipithecus is one of the closest, especially to the last common ancestor between Homo and Pan. When he started to stand on 2 feet and walk, Ardipithecus wasn't running, but he was walking pretty well. And so you had both the ability to be in the trees and the ability to walk. So it was really in the transition, between quadrupedy and bipedality. It's a wonderful. I've been looking at Ardipithecus a little bit. It's fascinating. Even Australopithecus, 6 million years ago already was standing. And so just imagine Ardipithecus, the first one, Ardi, she's on her feet and she started walking. What do you think happened? She took the first stone and she threw the first stone. What do you think happened? She probably fell down, right? Because all those postural synergies, all those proximal distal organization between standing and throwing, this anticipatory postural adjustment, all those neurophysiological synergies, probably, I mean, this is my expertise, but I guess, did not exist. And so it was through years and years and years of evolution, that those synergy. So I think this is the way it started. And as you know, the abundance of degrees of freedom that we had in order to do a movement is a constraint on the way we move, but then there is freedom to move in a particular way from one particular person or another particular person. And Hardy, probably like everyone else, was happy and sad, and probably those emotions diffuse one way or another in the way she was moving. And so, all of that is the origin of those signatures. And then through evolution, all the gestures revolution from the, cognitive revolution, the Neolithic revolution, the scientific revolution, the industrial revolution, the digital revolution that we are in now,
Right.
and the type of movement that we're doing, pitching, grasping, tapping,
Yeah,
double
a lot of
tapping,
tapping. Yes.
everything is now in our brain. We see
Right.
the brain print of those new gestures that we're doing at the moment. So everything has been converging toward this idea of signature that we're expressing today. So basically, to me, a signature is an emergent property out of the biomechanics, the dynamics, the neurophysiology, and this abundance of degrees of freedom that we have that allow us to do a movement in a very particular way. And so I've been interested in this idea of signatures, and we had a project also 10 years ago. It was called Alter Ego. And with my dear friend Krasimira Tsaneva, she's in Exeter, she's a mathematician for health, Mario Di Bernardo in Naples, who is a control theory and a dynamical system scientist. We've been turning around this notion, and basically, we did a very simple. It was in the context of social interaction, so we were interested to look at this idea of signature in the context of social interaction. So basically, when I do this movement myself, just a simple movement, I try to do this movement for like 1 minute.
Yeah.
I do that for like 1 minute. I change. I try to do that in a sort of fun. I try to vary. I try to improvise. So when you do this movement for 1 minute and you look at the dynamics of that movement, the way I do it is very different from the way you do it.
Should we try that? I think there's an experiment for that, right?
So there is an experiment for that. We're going to do it in a moment, but
Okay.
I'm just doing the solo version first.
Okay.
I do that, for like 1 minute. I do something very, very, very unique to myself because of the signature. Now do it yourself. So do that for a few seconds.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, you have a particular frequency. You can improvise. You can add other frequencies. The amplitude changes, etc., etc. And so,
but there's a comfortable frequency and a comfortable amplitude. So, like if I'm trying a little more, I have to consciously think about it. And if I don't think, and if I'm just doing something else, I'll probably always converge at a frequency and at an amplitude.
Correct. And now if you do the same, like looking at me, do the same looking at me.
Yeah.
Well, you're going to move in a different way.
Right. It seems more rigid.
Because my physical presence, the way I look, the way I talk, the strange accent that I have, all of that is impacting, your signature. So we were interested by trying to find a way to formalize those signatures. So it's all about velocity. So, you take the velocity profile of that movement, you normalize those velocity profiles, you create the PDF of that velocity profile, so the distribution of all those velocities that you have, and you look at the skewness of those distribution, and you have a distribution of those velocity profiles, and that's you. So one velocity profile is one trial, and you do 10 trial, and you have 10 velocity profiles. Now, if you look at the similarities between those distributions, there are like hundreds of metrics looking at similarities. The one that we use is called the Earth movers distance, which is basically the degree of overlap, between the distributions. And so the EMD, the Earth movers distance, gives you a value of something between 0 and 1. So 0 means all the distributions are similar. 1 means those distributions are different. And then if you plot that into a graph in order to visualize those distances, we use a dimension reduction technique, which is called multidimensional scaling. Basically, what pops up is a graph where you see all ellipses that belong to a particular person all ellipses that belong to another person, and you can visualize, the signature. So I would be in one particular location of that space. We call that this similarity space. You will be in another location of that space. And when we have those locations in that space, then we can play with it. So, for instance, I can do this movement looking at you and see whether your appearance is affecting, my signature in that space.
But
we can do this movement together.
Yeah.
So if you take your finger now, okay. So, so we're trying to. So you follow me.
Yeah.
Now I follow you. It's called the mirror game. Now we're trying to improvise. We're trying not to synchronize. So all those situations that we have in daily life, this is just an experimental way to test them. We can look at where we are in that similarity space and how the presence of others are impacting my signatures.
But how big is the similarity space? So let's say we have 10 people, it would be a little easier to differentiate. What if we have like 1,000 people in that space? Do you still see a distinction, or then you start seeing groups forming within that space?
I don't know. That's what I want to do now. I need more math, but that's what I want to do now. I'm limited in my capacity to understand those concepts and those metrics and the method, the math behind, to like 3-4 people. Now, indeed, do you see new regularities? When you increase the number of people. I'm interested in. So we've done. I mean, long story short, we've done lots of experiment with this very simple setup and with this formalism of the signatures behind, and looking at, for instance, mental health. So if you take like ASD, autism spectrum disorder, if you take schizophrenia, if you take social phobia, those pathologies are very different from each other, but they all share the social disorder aspect, right? So people they have difficulties to interact with others, especially those people that are unknown. This is kind of a common ground between those pathologies, and so they are in different locations in that space. So if you do this little game, patient and patient, patient and control, control and control, they are located in different regions in that space. So we have a way to identify those signatures with this simple technique. It is not very difficult when you have the math and you have the techniques. And then you can look at how those signatures change in that space, let's say with rehab, right? So at the beginning and then at the end. So you can test a particular rehab protocol and see how the signatures are changing. You can test questions such as stubbornness. You have people, whoever they're going to be facing,
their signature will be the same.
Have you noticed that? You have people, whatever you're doing, whatever you're saying, they're going to stay in that same location.
Right. And this is very similar to actually what, so when you said that you're looking at velocity profiles and then looking at how skewed or non-Gaussian the distribution is, you are effectively looking at turbulence, because when you go to the theory of hydrodynamic turbulence, it's basically based on the velocity profiling across time scales and looking at the kurtosis, for instance, so of the distribution. So this is what I do, but I do it I've been doing this for heart rate and other signals like center of posture, and not for this movement. And we see that, we see that people who have a chronic heart failure, for instance, or some other kind of heart anomaly, they generally differ along that space of kurtosis across different time scales. So maybe there's something to collaborate probably in the future, in this regard.
Fascinating, Madhu. I wasn't aware of that. And so stubbornness, leadership. Leadership, that we do in this little game, what's the metrics to quantify leadership? Is the leader necessarily the one that is ahead or compared to those that are lagging behind? Phase leadership. I don't believe in phase leadership. I think the leader is a good definition of leadership is the one that influences the most, those that are around them.
Yeah.
And so the degree of influence can be also looked at in where you are in that space and how you change your location in that space to go to others and then take them.
Right.
All kinds of possibilities here. So
and if you ask two people to coordinate, I think automatically one would emerge as a leader and one as a follower, right? Without any formal consent as well. And probably that's also personality specific.
And you can and leadership takes turn. In those sort of so it depends on the instructions, of course, but like
right.
You can play with the instruction, you can play with improvisation, we can constrain participants not to synchronize, which is impossible. And so this is a kind of a game that we play. It's called the mirror game, and we're expanding that to group situation, to we're injecting emotion, into those
right. That brings me to the idea of group synchronization. So a lot of your work also goes into the idea of emotions and emotion contagion as groups synchronize their movements.
Yeah.
Would you tell a little more about that?
Yeah, as you say, it's an extension, of alter ego was successful for us because we were able to really understand and define the right metrics to quantify those to help quantifying the behavior to answer the theory, and then we moved to group for natural reason, from 2 to 5 to 6 to 7 to 10. To look at more subtle structures of those intersimilitude space between people. And we realized that movement have emotional qualities all the time, right? So, the circumflex, arousal, valence, representation of emotion. Nobody knows what an emotion is. Emotion is being disputed. There are theories of emotion. People disagree.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's and in those spaces of science where people define emotions, there's always a kind of a battle going on between different research groups. Yeah.
But what we know, what we agree on in the disagreement that we have, depending on the school of thought, that we come from, is that emotions are embodied, is that they diffuse one way or another, in the way we move. And when we were doing those experiments, we were always concerned by trying to have people at a particular moment where they would be emotionally neutral. So emotion would not impact. And of course, this is ridiculous because, depending on what happened the day before, what happened the morning, etc. Anyway, so this is how we went into this relationship between emotion and joint action. And then we realized, there was like 6-7 years ago, we realized that you have almost no connection between two lines of research with all the applications behind education, sport, etc., between the affective sciences and the sciences of joint action. So joint action and synchronization, where people look at, the way we cooperate to do something.
Yeah.
And the science of emotion, they're completely separate.
Yeah, they don't look at movements at all.
Yeah, not at all. And so we were fascinated by this sort of parallel track, sometimes talking about quite the same thing, but in a very different ways. And so the goal of those projects, it was Untimement, there was another EU project. We tried to bridge the gap between science of emotion and science of... and so basically we played with this little, mirror game, improvisation, etc. We induced emotion. And so there are different ways to induce emotion. We had like 2 or 3 ways to induce emotion. We can go into the detail if you want. And basically what we found is that, of course, emotion impact, those synchronization metrics. So, for instance, negative emotion reduce the time of synchronization, the time in synchronization. So you spend less time being in sync when you are negatively induced. And positive emotion fosters and increase and improve, synchronization. So you get in sync faster and you stay in sync longer when you are positively induced compared to when you are negatively induced. And so this raises all kinds of questions. Let's say we're happy, you and I are happy. It's like, it's a little bit caricatural, but this is just to make the point. So, we are very positive.
Yeah.
The two of us. So we are, both of us are happy. We're going to get in sync faster, and we're going to stay in sync longer. Now and 3, 4, 5, 6 people, share happiness. Now let's say we're all negatively induced and we're all sad or anxious or mad. What's going to happen in the group? How emotion is going to propagate, within the group?
Right.
And we found that the more unhappy people or the more happy people, the faster it goes, to fall into the synchronization regime. Now let's say we have 3 happy and 2 sads. What do you think is going to happen? Who's going to win?
They'll form groups over time.
Now you have like 20 people, you have like 12,
Yeah.
like 11 happy and 9 unhappy. What do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, I think it might drift into one direction, right? Like one of them might take over the other. I think there will be some contagion. What do you think?
We don't know.
Okay, we don't
So
know.
we're doing those, sort of experimental games now.
Yeah.
It's going to take us years because it's, as you say, there are some sub-networks in the network.
Yeah.
So maybe the happy will sort of create a coalition. Maybe the sad are create a coalition. Maybe the light side of the force is going to dominate the dark side of the force. Maybe the other way around. It's a fascinating topic.
And I was saying that 5 people can be unhappy, but they can be unhappy because of some 6th unknown person. And once they start, kind of backbiting about that person, there's a different kind of coordination which emerges, right? All of them are talking kind of negative about that entity. So there's a very complex dynamics. Right.
So this is this project on emotion and joint action, trying to. So if you want to finish on that, the consequences.
Right.
Is there are multiple the consequences, and they can be very applied. First of all, in terms of theory, we need to bring the gap between those two theories and line of research. Not done yet. We're starting. Number 2, we need to revise all models of synchronization to bring emotional qualities in them. Take HKB, I can Kelso Boons and take Kuramoto. They very recently are sort of colored with emotion. This is really the beginning. And whether, HKB or Kuramoto and others, we need to revise them, with emotional qualities. And then there are more, practical issues. So in the emotion synchronization, loop, we are facing a sort of circular causality here. So emotion drives, as you rightly say at the beginning, people to be more in sync. But people being more in sync drives emotions and happiness and social rapport and affiliation, increased by synchronization. So it seems to be a sort of circular relationship between emotion and synchronization, with consequences, for rehab, with consequences for sport, with consequences in our daily life that we have not really touched yet.
Right. And most group setting activities, right? I mean, sports or kind of music festivals, the biggest examples of synchronization and movement tempos.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And Dr. Bardy, you have another. We touched upon the Move Beat project. We touched upon this emotional propagation. You also have a lot of work going on extreme kind of sports, like for example, somersaulting and which do not generally come under the confinements of typical movement studies. So what kind of extreme behaviors you're studying, and from what approach? I know that you are from the ecological tradition, so how are you applying ecological tradition to study behaviors like somersaulting?
Yeah, this was so I did this, as I said at the beginning, I'm always trying to find like real world scenarios and situations, because this is really where those mechanisms that we're trying to understand, operate. Of course, it's hard to control, it's hard to measure, everything is hard, but,
Yeah.
At the end of the day, this is what we're trying to understand. And so at the time, I was in between my PhD and my first, assistant professorship. And so before going to Brown, I did a few years of research on those I was a gymnast originally, and doing a somersault, like a backflip, is something that I really wanted to understand. Dave Lee at the time, in Edinburgh, also did some research on somersaulting, and there was a very large source of inspiration for me. So if you take just a simple backflip, a somersault from a standing position, like a 360-degree rotation, backward, if you try to understand, what's going on, it's extremely complex and complicated. And you look at those gymnasts, those young gymnasts. I was in Marseille at the time, and I was like going to the gym, looking at them. They could, like 12-year-old gymnasts, male and female, they could do like 25 in a row, 25 in a row, like one after the other. And I really wanted to, understand how they were doing that. If you look at so this is something that takes about like 500 milliseconds, between 400 and 600 milliseconds, depending on different parameters. It's perceptually extremely difficult because the head rotates at a velocity which can reach values such as like 1,000 degrees per second or 800 degrees per second. So you don't see anything. It's a very biomechanically constrained situation because you have this constant angular momentum at takeoff, and then you cannot do anything. And so in terms of the regulation, in terms of the control, the motor control aspect, what do you do? What are the possibilities that you have to regulate something?
Yeah, and very interestingly, it basically thwarts any predictive modeling or any computational motor control model, because the lags and internal models just cannot explain any such behavior. It can only explain a manipulendum, but nothing like somersaulting.
Absolutely impossible.
Yeah.
And if you take, this thing, you throw it in the air 60 times, you're going to see an explosion in variability. There is nothing you can do. And they do that all the time, in like 500 milliseconds, 25 times in a row.
Right.
And so I was interested by the sort of motor control strategies, if you want, that they could do that. And so it's either like, let's say, open loop, where basically they don't have the time to do anything, so they just program everything and just do it. So they just like instantiate a motor program, a plan that they have done before, which of course I wasn't believing that was true. But like when you look at this very, very short period of time, there's not much you can do. And as a matter of fact, this is not at all what they're doing. They're regulating their body orientation, exploiting this fantastic biomechanical constraint that they have to face. So angular momentum is constant, which means that the only thing that they can do is to close their body and extend their body. So you put your body in a tuck position that speed up, the rotation, the angular velocity speeds up when the moment of inertia is being reduced. And then they do the opposite to prepare for landing, they open their body. And what I found is that the way they open their body, both the time at which they open and the velocity at which they open, is based on the time remaining before touching the ground. So one way or another, they were able to detect information, first of all, about their flight time, which is possible at takeoff between, flight duration is only based on the vertical velocity. So if you have information about the velocity in the optic flow, you can sort of expect about, the flight time, the time you're going to spend in the air. And then, by anchoring the head on the floor, prior to landing, this is what they do. There's this wonderful head-body synergy. Basically, during the rotation, they stop, they anchor the head, in the environment to detect information. And I predicted there was time, and it turned out that this is time. So they detect, time to contact, and based on that, they speed up the opening, or they retain a little bit the opening, depending on how much time they have before landing, to regulate, their orientation prior to land. And so this sort of regulation extremely fast, extremely precise, allow those gymnasts to basically reach the ground with the correct orientation, which is not like vertical, right? It's something like 20 degrees, from gravity, from the direction of gravity, so they can cancel the angular momentum, and stay in a stable position. And so I did this research, on gymnastics, on the somersaulting, and then, Frank Zal and Claire Michaels, others, on nullifying optical acceleration. So all of this science that we've done, at the time, are all in the same domain, which is trying to find what is the right variable that we detect, how we can formalize, that information. Are people sensitive to that information? Are people using that information? So the ecological agenda, was followed by my group and other groups, pretty much at the same time in sport. And sport is fascinating for that reason.
Yeah. So and you'll see that a lot of ecological ideas have been adapted more enthusiastically in the sports world and training and rehabilitation than actually
So
motor
what do you think this is the case?
I think for them, it's like if you're an engineer and you want to build a bridge, you don't care about the theory. The bridge has to be there and it has to stand it. It has to take the load. So they are more interested in making things work, and they're not tied. They're not tied, based on their ego or their model. Things have to work, right? But when I see the whole field of motor control, in fact, I was in some crisis at some point when I see that there are 2 or 3 dominant theories, and the way I was kind of trained in science was from a very Popperian kind of idea that when you have 2 competing theories, you design an experiment which disproves one over the other, right? But we do not have that kind of tradition as a field in motor neuroscience. You have these pyramids of like the theoreticians who came up with this theory, their students and their students, and there's no crosstalk, right? And they have different journals in which they publish, and there are different paradigms which they use. And till they remain within that paradigm or within that journal, it's a safe space. So I think there's a less incentive in science to make things work than to actually promote the same theory and not falsify it, compared to sports science, compared to practitioners where they have to make things work because an Olympic means you have to get a medal. Your theory doesn't matter.
It's a very good point, and it triggers like 2 completely separate thoughts. In me, one is the to stay in the sport domain first, and then to extend that a little bit. This is why I think like the complexity that we have in sport is incredibly nourishing, for scientists. Is that they do it, right? They do it. If you take the somersault example, if you take long jumping, Dave Lee and others, where you run at this very high speed and you have to, regulate your step in order to put your foot on something that is 10 centimeters. It's there is no theory that explains that, and they're doing it, and so it's fascinating work to study. And the ecological agenda is, I think, mapping extremely well on this complexity. So doing the formalization, doing the maths to understand what's the information that is out there that is specified and that we can use. Are we sensitive to that information, in classic psychophysics experiment? Are we using that information in a particular law of control, if you want, in a situation? How do we develop, learn, and lose with age? These control laws that we have created, etc., etc. It goes pretty nicely, from the specification idea to the learning and the development at the end. And I think this is why sport has fascinated the ecological community so much, especially in the 80s and the 90s. A little bit less now, I have the feeling, but that may come back. And this is a reason why I'm always very upset. With the way sports science is considered, because there is, as you say, the long tradition to consider sport as a kind of a playground where theories developed in the real science, can be tested. So let's say, the theories, the model come from psychology, or they come from, neuroscience, or they come from physiology. And then, we're going to see whether this play out in sport. Well, this is absolutely the other way around. Those questions, they were born in the sport field, and
or any performance field. I mean, I'll give you a simple example. When I ride my motorbike, a 700cc Honda Shadow, and I'm riding it at, like, let's say 60 miles an hour, right? That's like about 100 kilometers, right? I do not have any time to respond to any stimulus the way stimulus is defined. And I do not have those, there's no way an internal model, a forward model, a predictive model, or a feedback model can work. You're traveling at 100 miles, and I'm taking those sharp turns, and I'm responding. And my right leg is on the brakes. My left leg is actually changing gears. That has to coordinate with my left hand with the clutch, and the accelerator on the right hand, which is always ready to push the brakes on my right? And I'm always watching almost everything around me, and I'm responding to all of that. One linear model, or even any linear system, it's just impossible to explain or predict anything. No,
absolutely.
And when I come back to lab, doing that task, my conscious doesn't allow me to explain anything based on that linear and an internal model.
Well, this is why EP has been successful, and why those very complex situations in sport have been studied. And the other thought that I have listening to you is maybe that's I don't know, but I'm going to say it anyway. I think one of the difference that we have between the US and Europe and other places, but it's really, so those big European, those European projects that we have, they were created originally to really create the European science. So find ways for countries and discipline really to work in synergy to create a territory of science that would make a particular print for Europe. This was this political agenda at the beginning. But the consequences of that is when we have this European project, the eligibility condition to have them requires to have different countries and to have different disciplines. And so you cannot be successful in those big, collaborative projects if you work with your EP friends. It's impossible. Right. There may be one or two exceptions, but in most situations, it has to be cross disciplines and cross country, with all the benefit for me. I love collaborative project for this reason: language, culture, different way to do science. I mean, I think it's fascinating. But of course, you're working with people you don't understand. You're working with people who do not share your ontology. You work with people who are your opponents in many ways. Of course, you can choose them, but and so that creates this situation where you have to be both open and respectful to the things that you disagree with. And at the same time, they prove you wrong occasionally, and you prove them wrong occasionally, and that creates a particular terrain for collaboration, which is both wonderful and terrible. It's terrible because if you take direct perception, as you know, it cannot be A and non-A. It cannot be direct and indirect. It's impossible. So what do you do when you have a proponent, of the indirect view, and so how do you do? Well, you don't do, but you have to do. And so it creates fascinating situation of respect, and you maintain your position, but at the same time you try to be open to what other people are thinking. Compared to more PI-based research that we also have, but not as developed as in the US, where basically you're following your line. So it's both pros and cons, but it's interesting in terms of how it shapes your thinking. That you can be as strong, ecological psychology, coordination dynamics, or whatever, and at the same time, sort of pay attention to what the people facing you are saying, just because, this is you're going to be spending 5 years together.
Right, and you see that reflected in some articles. So you would see some very ecological phenomena, but not expressed in those ecological terms a lot of times, and you wonder why that's the case. And now that explains, why that's the case.
You wonder why that's the case,
Right.
because I mean, you understand, Madhu, you're
Yeah.
writing an article and then
Yeah.
this is something you've been doing together for like a year or two.
Yeah.
There are PhD students involved. You have collaboration with those people. You have money
Right.
involved, etc. And then you're writing the article, and then one word is
Right.
a big source of disagreement for like 5 years because you disagree. This is not possible. We cannot use that, our word.
So this happened to me in my last lab, right? With the word of usage of the word noise. Now I live and thrive on noise, noise characteristics. And for my last lab, the noise was basically junk, right? So I declined to work on some papers because this is how the noise will be treated. And I'm like, that's not honest because I am promoting noise in a very different way, and I'm talking about noise in a very different way, and that
Yeah,
will create a confound,
yeah,
a credibility issue for me later on if I endorse
yeah,
the other view.
yeah. So it's not a, one is better
Yeah,
than the other. Of course, I want to keep doing, the science I believe in. And at the same time, I have to say, I've been more open over the years to some
right.
other school of thought, just because very often, it's a question of wording and, the way you name things, specification, versus something else. People are using representation in a very loose way, and they don't necessarily mean what originally, the computational theory were. I mean, it's not as simple. It can be gray, and you learn how to decode, what really people think, with the word that they're saying, and there is room for accommodation, and there is room for cooperation. There is even room for friendship.
Actually, I was coming to that. A lot of times you keep your friendship and collaboration above your love for a theory or love for a particular concept, right? So you
Yeah,
let things go. So above all, science is more like a human relationship and a social event per se. Than actually, it's all about what's in your head.
it
So
is.
that takes
Yeah,
over.
yeah. To me, it is. It's a very important aspect. It may be related to my culture. It may be related to my childhoods. Traveling
Yeah.
across all those places and meeting people. From I don't know, but it's really to me an important aspect. And even with the, I've been in the States. I work with many friends, in the States. I enjoy immensely this collaborative aspect in the context of culture, and even disagreements are wonderful when they are around a beer.
Right. And that naturally brings me to the ShareSpace EU project, which revolves around creating human-centric and inclusive social interactions, and kind of a hybrid future in multiple domains. So what exactly is the ShareSpace EU project? It sounds something big and something ambitious.
It is ambitious because the European Commission launched a few years ago those new calls on the metaverse, the European metaverse. And basically, the EU is trying to find a path in the metaverse tech and theory, etc., a little bit different from what the US is doing. And so it's really about like real world scenarios, being inclusive, and try to find ways in the metaverse that really would be helpful in education, in rehab, in art, in societies in general. And so we were very lucky to have one project accepted in the first call. There were 4 projects accepted in this first metaverse call. We were one of them, ShareSpace. And basically, what we are doing is to it's very connected, to what we have said before in terms of group synchronization, emotion, intention, etc. Look at the situation we are in now. Like
Yeah.
it's really disembodied.
Right.
I see your face. Actually, I don't, because of the contrast, I don't even see your body. I don't know if it's a chair I see your shirt. I mean, it's extremely disembodied.
Right.
You see a little bit the gestures that we're doing.
Yeah.
But we're losing a lot, right? We're losing, the emotion is pretty bad. The intention from the way we move is very abstract. And so
Yeah.
now you put a headset on, you put your virtual reality headset or an augmented reality headset on, and is that better? Not really, and you get sick. So basically it's about trying to find ways to facilitate social interaction in an embodied way in hybrid spaces, both VR and AR. And so we do that. So ShareSpace, this is like the context. ShareSpace focus on two specific things. One is amplification of intention coming from movement kinematics, right? So this is mostly my colleague and friend, Cristina Becchio from the Italian Institute of Technology. She's now in Hamburg, in a medical hospital in Hamburg. Cristina does this incredible science of specification of intention during movement, right? So when I grasp a glass, when I grab something,
Yeah.
either to drink it or to pass it to someone or to show it, that's different intention, individual communication or social information. And Christina has found that you can detect very early in time during the transport phase, well before you're gonna touch the object. There is information specifying the intention. And in our daily life, we are using those information about intention in movement kinematics all the time.
Right.
Well, in VR, this is lost.
Yeah.
And so we need to find a way to amplify this information to maximize, communication and social interaction in hybrid space.
Right.
And so what we do is we amplify. I'm going to show you how we amplify information, in those hybrid space in order to facilitate communication. So that's one. And the other one is synchronization. Again, because synchronization facilitates,
Yeah.
empathy, affiliation, etc. We want to maximize synchronization. And again, for reason related to delay, network issues, etc., we're losing synchronization. Everything is disembodied, etc., etc. And so what we do in ShareSpace is basically we have some like fundamental science, proof of principle, situation, but we also have like real world application. One is in health. This is low back pain. One is in sport. This is peloton cycling. And one is in art, where this is in Ars Electronica in Austria, where we are launching at the moment, right now, a call for artists, where we are going to give a choreographer the technology. We're going to give them the key concept, amplification and synchronization, and they have 1 year to create, an art piece that's going to be broadcasted at the Ars Electronica Festival next September. And so I don't want to be too long, but so the way we do that, we have real humans, playing synchronization, taking object to pass to others, etc. So real life situation. So this is step number one. Step number two, everyone has a MetaQuest Pro, and we are all in the metaverse.
Yes.
So we have non-autonomous avatars of humans that are just doing what the humans are doing.
Yeah.
But then we have more autonomous avatars. So we have a layer of semi-autonomous avatar. They are driven by a cognitive architecture, let's say, that maintain the synchronization at all time. So we're doing this little synchronization game, and I'm lagging behind. So the cognitive architecture detects that I'm going to lag behind, and it's going to speed me up in the metaverse.
Yeah.
To maintain synchronization all the time, because synchronization is good, right? And then we have a completely autonomous avatar, which is an AI. We call it Sarah. And Sarah is going to come, let's say, in the rehab game, while everyone is doing the synchronization game with the physiotherapist from home, by the way. So you can be in completely different location. Yeah. Sarah is going to come and help you because you're lagging behind, to speed up to maintain the synchronization. So this is the kind of ideas where we're playing
Yeah.
with the autonomy in the avatar to facilitate to sort of recreate this transmission of social information that we have in real life.
Right. I think we have some common grounds here, especially with the AR development. So we are working on multiple grants right now with automating some rehabilitation especially for gait based on AR interventions. Now, I don't know how successful they would be, and what would be the adoption, but we are on the same lines with
Very good, yeah.
in some of these aspects.
And AR, I mean,
Yeah.
XR in general, VR
Yeah.
and AR, it's becoming big everywhere. Hybrid spaces are becoming big everywhere. Technology is improving. We are going to be more and more, whether it's good or bad, we are
Yeah.
going to be more and more in those hybrid spaces where the physiotherapist is at the hospital, one patient is at the hospital because they came to the hospital, but three are at home.
Right.
And you want to find ways, to for isolation, social
Right.
reasons, etc. To be able to do the exercise together. This is applied to low back pain, but you can think of like tons of other situations. So imagine that, so the physiotherapist is a Sarah. She's an AI. We don't need her. She's doing the movement.
Yeah.
But then the real agent, like the real avatar, the one that is important, is the one that's going to help you,
Yeah.
to do the exercise that Sarah is instructing you to do. And so those levels of autonomy that you can manipulate in XR are ways to facilitate inclusion, remove people from isolation, and for training, if you take sports,
Right.
I mentioned the cycling example, you can sort of amplify a particular sign in the attack for those that are behind the peloton to help them detect or hide, the type of attack that they're going to produce in VR, in XR.
Right.
So ShareSpace is going to be 3 years. We started like 3 months ago, and so we developed the technology. We are creating the cognitive architecture, with Mario Di Bernardo in Naples to be able to detect online where we are and adapt the level of autonomy of the avatar to either speed up or slow down. And we're going to have the first demos at the Olympic Games in Paris in July. We're going to showcase the demo in Paris. We're going to be in Amsterdam for the World Pain Conference in August to showcase the first demo of the low back pain scenario, and we're going to be in Austria at the Ars Electronica Festival in 24 in September to show the artist aspect.
No, that's very interesting, and I mean these are all big projects, and for those who are actually not working on it, they take a lot of effort. Having an adaptive AR avatar which basically moderates any simple aspect of cognition or movement based on some feedback is a big feat in itself. These are not small things.
No, those are big things. And you see, Madhu, so this is the cons, but this is also the pro of being in those projects, is that the engineers, the rendering people, the capturing people, the math people, they need the data that we have, and we need so it's kind of mutually beneficial for everyone. Of course, it creates understanding, problem. We need time, but it's been years now that we're doing that, and so we I think the benefits are more and more there for the science that we do.
Yeah. No, you have definitely pioneered, these bigger projects with we're not talking about that, but definitely much bigger teams behind you, involved in each and every aspect of these projects. It's a very different kind of setup and very different way to do science than we have in individual PI labs. So, we are reaching towards the end of the conversation, Professor Bardy. What are some of the take homes would you like for young researchers like myself to have, who are still in in the stage of shaping, not yet decided how they will shape their labs or how they will shape their vision much longer in the future? What are some of the key learnings from your career you would like us to know?
It's a large and tough question, Madhu. I would say, well, first of all, science is fun, right?
Yeah.
Science is fun. I've enjoyed science all my life. It's fun. Of course, we have pressure. We need to make careers, publish or perish. I mean, getting our grants, all of that is complicated. It takes our effort and energy and time. But to the young ones, I mean, don't forget the fun part. And the fun part is, to me, a driving force of the reason, I'm doing what I'm doing, is that everything that is around the methodology, the statistic, the math, the science, the theory, fun is around, and grab the fun part, every time you can, because this is what makes you in the condition to move forward. Of course, there are rewards, there are pain, but like the fun part is absolutely key. And again, this is why I like those collaborative projects, because it's a lot of fun. And of course, you get a little bit more relaxed, as you're moving forward with your career. But going to Italy, you're going to Spain, sharing a beer together and doing science in a bar. This is not new to you. We all know that, but I've really experienced probably some of the best ideas that I've had in my life. I don't know if I had good ideas, but at least the inspiration that those ideas gave me for my science, it's either running.
Yeah.
Have you noticed how fascinating we have ideas when we walk or run?
Even take a shower for me.
I even take a shower. I need to pay
Yeah.
more attention when I shower. I'm not sure. Anyway, but running. And the other
Yeah.
one is being together in a bar, in a restaurant, outside the lab, outside the sort of more formal atmosphere.
Yeah.
This is where the ideas come from, the sharing, the exchange. That's absolutely key. So fun, having fun together is a way, for me at least, to move forward. Maybe the second thing is really about like movement science. As you know, this is my territory. I've been doing other things, in human-computer interaction and a little bit of robotics and cog science, etc. But always from the movement lens. And we have responsibility as movement scientists, right? Not only in terms of pushing the science, the theory, but the practical aspects. You mentioned that before yourself, is that people are counting on us. You get this huge grant, to help people. I mean, you better do the job in the right way, because people have hopes. I was
Right.
at the World Parkinson Conference in Barcelona in July, which is an amazing conference because it's like thousands of people, but it's a mix between patients and scientists. And the patients are coming, and they want to know, they're looking at your graph on the screen, and they want to know why this group is better than that group. And they go to your booth where you sell your technology, and they want to try it because their life depends on it. And we don't have a lot of conferences like this, but I love those conferences. The PAN conference is the same.
The stakeholders are there. Yeah.
Yeah, you see the end users. I mean, you see the real people, and they're paying attention to what you're doing. They read your articles, and sometimes their life depends. So we have responsibility, and we need to really be aware of that. And in terms of the grants that we're writing, in terms of the experiment that we're doing, the signature idea, people are looking at those signatures and they say, oh, but so this is how it's going to go in 20 years from now. So we have a responsibility, and we should match those responsibility and be aware of them. So maybe those are the two aspects. There are certainly many others that do not come to my mind, but don't forget the fun part.
Right. Always.
And come to see us. And come to see us, and we have both the fun part and the science part.
No, definitely, Dr. Bardy. Like, I know you only through online and virtual means and by reading your work. and sharing, articles basically. But I'm also very keen to visit your facility at the EuroMove Center, as well as to discuss science with Bear, as you say, with you.
Madhu, you're welcome anytime. Just let me know and we'll be happy to have you.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Bardy. We have learned a lot, and I hope we'll see you again at a later point with more details about movement and their roles in our lives.
I'm sure we will, Madhu. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for
Bye.
your time for this podcast
Bye,
that I found
everybody.
helpful, and for this conversation that we're going to continue later.
Have
Thank
a great
you.
evening ahead, Dr. Bardy.
You
Bye-bye.
too. Thank you, Madhu. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.